In the far north, beyond the great Arctic Circle, two ships lie in wait off the coast of Kikiktak and celebrate their great discovery. This project, one of peace between the walkers of the ice and the masters of the ocean, has led to the recovery of an ancient, long believed to be nothing more than a legend told by fools and liars. What is this object? Why, it is the lost GBS Terror, a Babylonian exploration ship. A ship of legends, said to be filled with knowledge of worlds long dead, an asset to anyone who can procure it. A quick update on the world at large, for those who might have missed what was shown in the last few parts. Hint, lots of people died. Paul Kruger once again leads his nation to the #1 spot. Why he chose to cosplay as Midna from Twilight Princess upon hearing the news, I don't really know. A quick refresher on the relationships between the current survivors. Funny to see that only 4 of these nations have no beefs with anyone. A Kimberly fleet squeezes itself through the Philippines, presumably on its way to take out the last of Japan. This isn't the most high-tech example of a modern military, but it might do. The UN unilaterally embargoes Mongolia, isolating them further from the cool kids. Genghis may not be all-powerful, but it might be wise to consider not cornering the guy who can still pack a good punch and leaving him without options. The Middle East, regardless of which battle royale, always remains a location where great and not so great empires clash over who and what really matters in the world. Right now, it seems that making Judaism the world religion isn't one of those things, much to the disappointment of the stateless children of Israel. What does matter is the defense of Jericho and Sparta, as both cities have come under attack from the Cylon war machine that is the Burs. In the land known as the Graveyard of Empires, it seems that Sabia might have finally cracked the curse and led Afghanistan to their final doom, as Hotark uses his last engineer and trade mission to somehow get out of the place he is in. He put up a good fight, but his days are numbered, and that number ain't very high. La Cucaracha here is showing the world how a few nukes their way is generally not the type of thing that has a habit of slowing them down. There's a lot you can say about Mexico, but their will to bravely charge in is not to be questioned. A more detailed view of the great Mexican standoff. As it has been for the last few parts, Mexico has done well to throw enough forces to build up a line of defense that protects their core from attacks by either Australia or the Bucks, even if they are using tech that is generations removed from what either power is throwing at them. The fact that Juarez is still holding is a testament to the power of good lands and wonders, and also a ridicule to Australia's ability to force project and the Buccaneers' ability to defend themselves. Another strategic view, this time focused around the Bay of Bengal. The front lines between the Boers and the Vietnamese are hardening, and may one day become part of a war that can cage the Orange Giant. It seems that cutting through Ethiopia to face one of the most powerful players on the board did take a toll on Kruger's cyborg army. The offensive is also slowing down against another power player, though Boer victory against the Buccaneers is clear on the horizon. In other news, Peshgal Daramesh, one of the submarine's top intelligence analysts, has finally finished his field training and is now ready to go out into the world. His first destination, Korea, a nation I'm sure many would like to get a better view of after their big gains of late. France might be long gone, but the descendants of the survivors of that nation talk Morgan into allowing them to build a colony on the African coastline, one that can be used to launch a great campaign against the Boers for the heart of Africa. Too bad the idea might have worked better if the Bucks sent them with some sort of protection. Of the two main powers in this part of the world, only Vietnam looks to be making an active move towards building a carpet of some form, even if they're not too interested in using it to try and push against those Boer holdings in the Red Sea. Instead, both sides prefer to dig in, going for a long war interrupted with the occasional skirmish around Jericho. While there are no active pushes, the Vietnamese have no intention of letting the Boers rest, sending a nuclear strike force south to harass the waters around Harrismith. We get a shot of the Brazilian core. They've done well for themselves after taking over Chile and for pulling out of that war with the Boers before drawing the Reichseier. Question is, where will they decide to go next? They're still up there among the relevant powers on the cylinder, and their support would be useful to anyone. We get another strategic view, this time of North Africa. The nukes, as always, have been flying freely, and no city has been spared the nuclear fire, other than Tangiers, that is. It does seem that Fort-de-France stands tall, with the Bucks and Iceland using their naval assets to hold this location at all costs. Pesh is already building a network of informants, a task that is proving increasingly difficult in times of war, especially on the front lines. Think about it. Would you trust some guy whose nationality you can't quite place with knowledge that might decide over the future of your entire city, maybe even your nation? In the north, the Inuit and the Yakuts are still at each other's throats. The Walkers' cities are in a far worse shape than those of their opponents, but they do seem to have the unit advantage not only in numbers, but also in technology. Getting shelled with primitive mortars is still getting shelled, but it's not as bad when you have a jetpack. Ah yes, the closest thing the Buccaneers have to a core. What a marvelous sight. The vain memory of other civs having once been here is somewhere around, but Morgan redecorated well. Any color is fine, as long as it's black. On another note, if the Bucks were to significantly ramp up their airplane production, they could darken the skies in a similar way to how they've already darkened the sea. Out of nowhere, Korea sends a wave of forces to the largely undefended Verkhnevelyuysk. Yakutia was focused on fighting them in other theaters, and thus they did not prepare for something so ludicrous. The push against Yakutia is on. Right now, they might be able to hold the line, but it's looking far less likely that they will be able to find a way to rally themselves against the invaders. Seeing the threat that Kruger represents to their glaciers, Iceland and the Inuit make peace with the Boers. In exchange, the Reich promises not to melt them, at least not for the foreseeable future. This is bad news for the Alliance, which has just lost its most powerful and another still very powerful member. If this continues, Vietnam and the Buccaneers may be fighting the Boers on their own soon. In the South American Pacific, everybody seems afraid of leaving the shallow end of the pool, gathering in their respective empires' territories in order to form a proper naval carpet. Only the Icelandic and the Koreans are brave enough to brave the waters, but alas, they do so in technology that any museum would be proud to possess. The Koreans rush and take yet another city from Yakutia, and their advance does not look stoppable. Darkhan's only hope at this point is that the foreign peacekeepers do their job. Info time! Of the many nations still left in the game, it seems that the best cities in the world all belong to the Boers. One can only assume the endless internet arguments between cybernetically augmented citizens about whose hometown is the greatest. Personally, I'd go with Kronstadt because I like floating islands as a concept, but Klerksdorp and Pretoria are arguably more important to the nation's wonder whoring. More info on wonders and who has them, though not necessarily who built them. The Vietnamese start the de-Boerification of the Middle East by taking Nha Trang, then settling the city of Vung Tau to ensure no one tries to mess with them here. Seeing how distracted the Boers are with the Bucks, their diverting of resources might give Morgan the ability to hold out a lot longer. Australia has built up her forces around Mexico to make yet another big push into Torreon and Monterrey. If this plays out like all the other times, Australia will be able to take out those units before Mexico has a chance to recover, but shall stall somewhere after making a landing until Juarez suddenly stomps more units out of the ground like he always does. Ishtar is sent out for fries, this time to drop in on Sibir and see how things are there. The Koreans are certainly not showing any signs that they are slowing, as they charge right into the gates of Zygansk. With everything still focused on that push against the Inuit, Yakutia really has no option but to build a solid defense here. With Iceland pulling out of the war, the Boers can now take the time to try and rebuild those lands they took from the Bucks, if only so they can put some supply lines in place for the future. This is not leaving the Bucks in a good position, as this war is starting to drain them of any value they might find in holding onto these lands in the long run. More so with the potential threat of Brazil to the south. Yet another strategic view, but off the Madagascar Channel this time. Much like the shot of Vietnam, these lands look largely untouched by the hands of war, which means that Kruger will have no problem with keeping the supply of goods he will need to run his Cylon war machine. However, his armies seem to be a little thin on the ground, which is further evidence that it's becoming harder and harder for the Boers to sweep the world clean. Jandamarra closes in on Osaka and the Japanese tremble. Nothing they have can withstand the not even all that advanced Kimberley fleet, which is now getting ready to deliver the nukes. Will that Finnish paratrooper save them from certain death, or will the admirals decide to let loose anyway? This, my friends, is what peace looks like on the cylinder. Two mighty nations with powerful industry and not that far from each other culturally, pointing rockets at the border. You can tell Serbia have much more trust for the Finnish, as their border with Tiumen is military-free, even though there's a citadel to be manned. The Blackfoot Australian islands of Hawaii are generally pretty peaceful for the most part. The surf is always pounding, the sun is always warm, and the smoke monster attacks are down this time of year. Everything about the place makes people feel at ease about the world at large. Even the Australians doing some test maneuvers is fine with the locals, as them and the Australians are mates at this point. The Boer cyborg Cylons release yet another wave of nukes at Henry Morgan's colonial fleet. Buck Colonel Saul Ty is reported to have gone and yelled at his crew that they needed to impress the old man or die trying. He later started to demand that someone turn off that fracking music, and nobody knew what the frack he was talking about. Serbia has discovered a spanner thrown into their invasion of Lashkar Gah when a force of Ethiopian survivors show up outside the city. Seems those trade missions might have given them a small moral boost just when they needed it most. Too bad Serbia isn't at war with Ethiopia, nor has much of an issue with them. Korea. You might not be the same Korea from the first Battle Royale, but the impression Kim Jong-un left on your people shall be felt for many generations to come. And seeing the amount of fallout in Yakutia right now, so it will on them. Just a small thing, narration was at this point taken over by Technostar BTD5, seeing as the old one suddenly stopped working and we still haven't heard from the warranty people. As for the slide, we see an Ethiopian war party being hosted by the Finns, which are maybe possibly trying to recruit them as a Black Ops mercenary force. Send in the Keko troopers, or at least what's left of them. Finland has declared a coalition war against the Buccaneers, the other belligerent being covered in a later slide. A wave of XCOMs hits Buccaneer Italy, quickly surrounding the city of Kumae. Its health is still at full, suggesting that Finland has yet to do any significant bombing raids. It is likely to stay that way as well, since most of Finland's air force was destroyed in the Kekkonen, and Kekkonen has yet to rebuild it. A Dvinish infantry watches from the southeast, possibly thinking about recapturing one of his former cities. Finland's partner in the war on piracy? Brazil. What a snake Pedro is, going from helping with the Boers to stabbing his neighbor in the back. This war deck is huge, seeing as Brazil has almost a full carpet and a prime position to gut Henry Morgan from below, while the Buccaneers have depleted much of their forces in the war against the mighty Cylons. Ethiopia, tired of the warring that destroyed their own nation, has decided to try and save another one: Afghanistan. Ethiopian units occupy 4 out of the 6 tiles next to Lashkar Gah. Unfortunately, one of the other 2 spots around the city is occupied by a Siberian infantry. Get your F-keys ready, everybody. This graveyard of empires is almost in a grave itself. Meanwhile, in Japan, nothing happens. Just nothing. The 2 privateers even seem to have healed back up a little. The Boers take advantage of Morgan's 2-front situation and increase their Dakar, taking Gades and Carthago Nova. Afrikar is at this point pretty much over. If the Buccaneers decide to defend, they will lose valuable resources against the Brazilians and Finns, which may hurt them even more in the long run. After a tour around the world, we wind up back in South America, where Brazilian units have swarmed across the border and into Buccaneer territory. What surprises me is that the only target of Brazilian bombers has been Tiwanaku, which just so happens to be the only border city they haven't surrounded. Around Machu, we see what amounts to basically all of the Buccaneer resistance. What could be worse than losing your home and being forced to live in Indian ghettos? Having your host plot to brutally murder you in your sleep? What's sad is that Sri Lanka will actually have a fairly difficult fight if they try to kill the Ethiopians stationed in their lands. In Mexico, plans are drawn up to attack Yakutia, which might amount to something if Mexico had many units, Mexico was not at war with two stronger neighbors, and most importantly, if Mexico actually bordered Yakutia. Meanwhile, Australia sends an embarked AA gun towards Monterrey, perhaps planning to actually capture the city for once. As our espionage reports continue to trickle in, we are made aware that Korea is plotting to destroy the last legion once and for all. In relevant news, Korean bombers have reduced Elgyai to black with a melee unit in range. Yamanka and Nizhnekolimsk are also at 0 HP, but with no nearby melee units, so they will probably stay Yakutian for a few more turns. Wow, that's quite an impressive stack of aircraft in Hamburg. To the south, Keko troopers have made it all the way to Coimbra, promising to lay siege to an area previously untouched by the Orange Containment Project. TPangolin has found a worthy replacement for the ever-long info addict slides in this simple list of all major statistics, arranged by population. The Inuit and Australia have both begun the future world's population climb, sporting over 400 million inhabitants each. Finland has recovered significantly and is now at 30 million, nearly half of what they had before the war. Korea has taken Elgyai, leaving Yakutia with only 9 Arctic cities left in their empire. Genghis Khan looks at that turn of events with disappointment, as his Sam was this close to capturing the city instead. The Inuit seem to have brought another melee unit to the front lines, in the form of a robot infantry near Zgansk. Back to Brazil. At this point, it's clear that Pedro's army has undisputed superiority. More units continue to surround the border cities. I have a feeling that Brazil's turn hasn't processed yet, since units are still in the same spot as we last saw them. What we can see now is the Buccaneer naval counterattack near Valparaiso. This key city took Brazil many turns to conquer during the annexation of Chile. However, without a melee ship nearby, Morgan will also need a while to get it. We now shift along this incredibly large front to the Amazon River basin. Not much has happened yet, but the Buccaneers are already showing naval superiority as Manaus is blockaded. It seems as though Brazil wants this to be an intercontinental conflict. Unfortunately for them, the only form of intercontinental warfare they know is sticking their land units on small boats and charging blindly forward. However, it might be enough to take Salé, given its current bombed-out state. Only time will tell if they manage this before the Buccaneer Navy tears them to shreds. The Buccaneers have not succeeded in repelling either the Finnish nor Boer attacks. XCOM squads still surround key European cities. However, expect Iberia to remain Buccaneer for some more time, as Kekkonen has yet to send enough XCOMs to defeat Morgan's cities. We now see where Finland's air force went. I count up to 45 planes in this slide. What still confuses me, however, is the complete lack of airstrikes. Maybe they're saving up for an all-in attack with their hypervelocity missiles at the ready. In Africa, the Boers have secured Olympia without Icelandic support of the Buccaneers. The Mexican standoff is heated up as the Blackfoot join in again. Of the original participants, the Blackfoot were the first to drop out, after retaking only one of their cities. This time it appears to be different, as Crowfoot has already taken the Sioux capital down to black, with paratroopers in range to take it immediately. What would make everyone's day is if the Blackfoot resurrected the Sioux again, passing up the opportunity to take another capital. We now turn our attention to the Pacific coast, where troops from Australia and the Blackfoot compete to take Torreon. I predict Australia, since their turn hasn't processed yet. An Inuit settler eyes the area, planning to plop down his claim as soon as a city becomes too uninhabitable for Mexico. Both Mexico and the Blackfoot have opened borders with the Inuit, which allows the Blackfoot to attack Hunkpapa from all sides. As we return to Yakutia, TPang highlights a Finnish peacekeeper attempting to blockade the Inuits' advance. Korea has managed to get a robot infantry next to Nizhnekolimsk. The city will likely fall in the next turn or two. Press F to pay respects. The graveyard of empires has finally fallen to the Sabir Horde, adding another victim to Kuchum Khan's empire. Afghanistan was an early contender, settling the fertile Indus River Valley and eventually expanding their empire to Bangladesh, as well as settling 2 Antarctic colonies. However, they soon stagnated, losing their prime target of the Mughals to Finland. By the time Vietnam came around, Afghanistan was an empire in decline. Vietnam quickly took most of it, leaving the once proud communist state with only 3 cities. When World War II broke out, Siberia declared war on Afghanistan. This conflict was initially a success as Afghanistan managed to flip 2 Siberian cities, including one in the Middle East. However, when Vietnam, Yakutia and Finland made peace, it was only a matter of time before Kabul finally fell. Rest in peace. We end this part with a shot of the Arabian Peninsula. Vietnam has put up a fight, capturing Basra, Jericho and Najran in this part. War units are sparse in the area, probably due to Kruger fighting in the west instead. As we see our farewell religion slide, we see that Catholicism is still massively in the lead over Judaism. Only 5 followers of Islam remain, a number that is likely to fall if more conflict hits the area. We end this part with a standard religion map. In this part we saw the fall of Afghanistan and 2 major new wars, Brazil versus the Bucks and Blackfoot versus Mexico. Conflict continued in Yakutia, Mexico and the Mediterranean, and Iceland made peace with 2 new capitals in their control. This has been Burgerkrieg, reading slides by your emergency narrator, Technostar BTD5. And Squatter also. There was some heavy editing going on, but I hope I delivered the message correctly.